Welcome to the 82nd episode of Dialogika, a podcast between two friends about the latest in society, politics, and feminism in Indonesia and the world. I'm Stephanie Tangkilisan.
And I'm Sweden Lee. And this week is a slow news week, so we're going to talk about that scandal, the Harley Davidson and Brompton scandal.
That brought down a good amount of directors in Garuda, Indonesia.
Including the person on top, Ari Askhara. We're going to talk a little bit about the scandal, what it means for Erick Thohir, the new BUMN or StateOwned Enterprise Minister, and how this is not the first time Garuda has been caught in hot water.
We're going to explain a little bit also about what it means to be a state-owned enterprise and what does that signify and why that is.
And how they should do better.
Yeah, here's to it. What's up with Indonesia this week, Sweden?
It's been a bit of a slow news month because I feel like there's not much to talk about, but I guess for this first episode of December, we will talk about a major/minor scandal in Indonesian news, which is the whole Harley Davidson Brompton scandal that brought down the president director of Garuda Indonesia as a show of force from the new BUMN minister, Erick Thohir.
Indonesia is set to fine Garuda in the aftermath of a smuggling scandal. And the airline's CEO, Ari Askhara, has been sacked after a government-led investigation revealed that he'd smuggled a Harley Davidson motorbike and two bicycles onto a plane. He is said to have avoided paying more than $100,000 in custom taxes by not declaring the three items. The investigation found that another employee assisted Mr. Askhara. The company's current chief financial officer, Fuad Rizal, is to step in as acting CEO.
So, to recap what happened in the space of just a few weeks, from the middle of November until the beginning of December, the now ex-president director of Garuda Indonesia, Ari Askhara, who was just in power for over a year, was caught in a scandal of basically smuggling a fancy vintage Harley Davidson as well as super hipster Brompton bikes, which are these like fancy folded bikes that you would expect, you know, hipsters with like nice trimmed beards to be wearing, not like some
like rich hipsters.
Rich hipsters, like, you know. So Ari Askhara basically bought the Harley Davidson through eBay in Amsterdam using one of his minions, as one of his Garuda minions in the Amsterdam office, bought it on eBay, tried to bring it in to Indonesia via other means and failed. And so this time, because Garuda is receiving a new shipment of an Airbus plane, decided to smuggle those motorbikes, which are considered as luxury goods and need to be taxed appropriately, smuggled them into these new planes and brought them here to bypass the whole taxation and custom system. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, on 17th November, as the plane is parking in the special hangar just for Garuda planes, the people from the tax office, from the customs office came and, you know, did a random check because they got a tip that there was going to be some non-declared luxury products being brought in. And so they checked everything and they found the Harley Davidson spare parts and the bike. And the whole shebang unraveled.
What's the value of these bikes? Like, it's around, the ones I saw are like 70 to 100 million.
The ones that were caught in the scandal was like about 50 to 60 Indonesian million.
So that's like $4,000 to $5,000.
Yes. While the Harley Davidson itself was like 800 Indonesian million rupiah, which is about what, I think like 70,000?
Yeah, 655, something like that, depending on our currency today.
But that's a different story. But anyway,
I feel like this particular corruption scandal has kind of gained public attention because
it's a Harley.
The ridiculousness of the whole situation.
Yeah.
It's a Harley Davidson. It's a big showy machine.
Yeah.
And like people are like seeing photos of really fancy motorbikes in a country where most people drive really like functional utilitarian bebeks, like motorcycles.
Yeah.
So I think it's like a relatable item of scandal that people can be like, what the hell?
I mean, if you're a biker, right?
I mean, as opposed to like Panama Papers, money laundering operations in far off places, like this is like something that can be grasped.
See, like even people in power, just all they want is a nice bike. And they will, go through all kinds of illegal ways to obtain it without having to pay their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's funny, right? The whole point of the scandal is just around paying taxes. It's not even that exciting.
I mean, it's like sometimes you rarely say this, but good job, tax evasion officials.
Yeah. Wow, you guys did your job. Oh, nice. Good job, Bea Cukai people.
I think what's interesting as well is like Garuda has this whole show on their annual report about their like anti-corruption policies and their policies of integrity. That's like in capital letters, integrity, integritas. And then this happens, and like they're like very proud of their like whistleblowing system. But like if you were a Garuda employee who thinks that this is not right, you can't report it because the
person on top,
Director Utama, the person on top, is involved.
Yeah.
So they had to go to another government agency. So good job, resourceful Garuda whistleblower. Like, good job.
And what's fascinating is that as this whole scandal broke about the motorbikes and about Ari Askhara's involvement in it, it's also unraveled just like his poor governance as the president director of Garuda, because the union of Garuda workers came out with statements saying that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Under Ari, Garuda has been practicing some really poor management practices, including making their stewardesses work longer hours past what is allowed by the law, pushing them into really extreme work conditions, and then sort of like blackmailing them, like if they don't do these extra hours or these extra tasks, then they're going to be moved on to a different department or they're just going to be fired.
Right.
And so there's been like a culture of intimidation over the last year under Ari, that a lot of people are now like...
And Garuda now is not a profitable company. There are losses.
Yeah.
So, like, on the surface, they are saying, like, okay, we're going to squeeze our employees to, quote, be more efficient. But to the extent of, like, being unsafe business practice and just inhumane. Whereas, like, the Garuda employees are, they're not earning that much money compared to the salary of the Director Utama, Ari Askhara's salary. So it's sort of like this inequality in action. And then on top of that, you have him being involved in a huge smuggling operation.
Mm-hmm. For his own personal...
enjoyment.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes to show the lack of empathy that he has towards his employees and just kind of like the mentality that he feels like he's entitled to using Garuda, because essentially what's happening here is he feels that there's a level of entitlement, right? Like there's this, I'm the Director Utama, so I can do what I want to do, and I can use this aircraft as my own personal shuttle service.
Yeah.
Like it's like he thinks he's the king of his own kingdom.
And I think that's indicative of a lot of how BUMN enterprises, right? Like these companies, like, state-owned enterprises have been perceived, where for a lot of people, they think that, once they become the leaders and the people in charge of these enterprises, then they have all the power. Because in many ways, you've kind of got the buy-in of the government and things like that, when in fact, no, you're supposed to be held at a higher level of accountability, because you are not only trying to build the business, but you're building a business for the nation, right?
Yeah.
And I think for Garuda in particular, like, this is not the first time that the person in charge of Garuda has been involved in a scandal. Unfortunately, not even like in the last few decades. In the last like 5 years, they've replaced their person in charge.
I mean, the previous director Utama as well, Emir Sattar, was involved in a corruption scandal involving auctioning off engines of planes that are like Airbus and Rolls-Royce, and money laundering with Indonesian businessman Sutikno Sudaryo, who coincidentally, or maybe not, also owns the Harley Davidson franchise, among a lot of other luxury holdings like the Bulgari hotels and jewelry.
So I guess Ari's case of just like getting one Harley wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, this
is like small fry compared to the old.
And like the usage of the actual PT Garuda Indonesia as a company's name to like kind of it was a lot more sophisticated of a crime, let's just say.
Yeah. But I mean, it doesn't lessen the fact that like not only are these people in power obviously abusing their power as the leaders of these companies, but it's also like, wow, you guys just like expensive stuff and wants to not pay taxes on them. It's almost just like the absurdity of the wealth gap, right? Like the insensitivity to the rest of the population is just ludicrous. And I think that's what a lot of Indonesians have found galling. It's just like, wow, you guys are just so too much. Too much.
So, I mean, like, let's talk a little bit about what a state-owned enterprise is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think when we see Garuda, we know it's kind of a state-owned enterprise, but it seems pretty independent enough. So a state-owned enterprise is essentially a for-profit company that is majority owned or like owned by the government. So the reason why this exists is so that, like for like public goods, like building roads, building airports, building ports, like you need companies to build these facilities, even though the money or the company might not necessarily be profitable, just because it's a necessary good for the country itself, right? So like when you think of highways, when you think of ports, like creating a port in the middle of nowhere might not seem to make sense for a for-profit company to do. So this is where the state-owned enterprises come in and make sure that these things are built and operational. And then, like with Garuda as well, like maybe they're all gonna have to, unlike other airlines, they're supposed to have routes where maybe it's not financially feasible yet for the company to have a route to a certain town, but it's necessary for the economy of the city to grow. So, that's what it's for. But at the same time, state-owned enterprises are supposed to be run at the level of excellence. Like, that's what is expected from them. It's not, and a lot of state-owned companies itself are, like, compared to the regular ministries, like, because they are, like, ostensibly for profit, the directors and all of the, like, higher levels are, like, market rate or above market rate salaries of a private company as opposed to, like, a ministry. So
there's a lot of money involved
to kind of like attract the best talent. Yeah. And like their budgets are super big and they have a lot of autonomy and power to operate and within the country. And for the most part, like rightfully so, like there are a lot of good that state-owned companies do, right? Like Pertamina, for example, like without it, most Indonesians won't have gas in all of different places, like
with all the fuel subsidies and things
with
like
all the fuel subsidies and all of like, and Erick Thohir, who was recently become the state-owned enterprise minister, has a long history of being a like successful businessman.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the idea of like running the state-owned enterprise as a business, but not a personal business where you as a director, if you have a family company and you want to like use your planes to transport your Harley Davidson, that's kind of okay as long as you pay the taxes on it.
Yeah. But this is like
this is
I mean,
not
even at a private level, it's already questionable, let alone a state-owned enterprise level. But I think, in particular, I've noticed with like, even in Jokowi's first term, but I think even more so in his second term, he's always championed this idea that the government needs to work with private sector, right? Like him coming from a business background himself, there needs to be more collaboration and more working together between these, what a lot of people have considered as two different spheres, the public sphere and the private sphere, in order to get things done, because otherwise nothing will get done.
No.
But I think, unfortunately, historically, BUMN and a lot of the companies that you mentioned earlier, like Garuda and Pertamina itself, which has its own fair share of historical scandals, a lot of these companies have not been run properly. Just simple as that. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, the idea of being somebody like Erick Thohir, who, even though a lot of people might already know him because he's been around, like he was the campaign manager for Jokowi's re-election campaign. And if you're a football fan like me, he was the former owner of Inter Milan. But that's not important. Like, people might know him, but he hasn't been really that involved in government. He's been really involved in business, obviously.
Yeah.
He's a fresh face when you compare to the other people that used to be in charge of BUMN.
So I think, like, in a way, he is kind of like the biggest winner from this whole situation because he's like catapulting into a national level.
And I think, I remember reading the news a little bit, right? Like when he was first appointed as the new minister of BUMN, replacing Rini Sumarno, there was a lot of, I think, question marks about like, oh, he was Jokowi's campaign manager. That's why he got this position. And then obviously there was the news about how he wanted to appoint Ahok as the head of Pertamina, and then everybody was like, oh, why are you appointing Ahok? Things like that. So there was a lot of suspicion from the old political guard about Erick Thohir, and I think this is a huge win for him to be like, no, I'm gonna do it my way, and I'm already doing something better.
Yeah.
Look at what I caught.
Yeah.
I'm always like healthily skeptical about any business people involved
businessmen turned politician
in politics, but at the same time, I'm also like, I'm willing to give anyone a chance to be like, all right, let's see how you're going to manage this position and how you're going to handle all these difficult people. And I think, we started this conversation sort of like making fun of the whole scandal because it is, after all, anchored around a motorbike, which I just heard a motorbike now.
Pass by.
Just literally passed by. That was great timing. But at the heart of this, right, is about trying to tackle some deep-seated corruption at a state-owned enterprise level. And that's not an easy thing to tackle for anyone, let alone somebody who's just, starting their job.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing, as I've said before, is kind of like the entitlement of Ari Askhara and people who are technically, in a way, government employees to evade taxes that pays their salary, while at the same time, for the sake of profitability, pushing their own employees to do like really long shifts cross country and across the world, basically, in a way that is unsafe and inhumane to do, while he's like sitting back on his computer looking at eBay like, oh, this is the bike I want. It's just kind of a show of like the disparity in our like state-owned enterprises.
And it's a company of like national pride, right? Like,
yeah,
we remember the days when Garuda was banned from America and Europe. That was when we were like teenagers. And
I have to say, like, Garuda is a kind of company that has a lot of public trust in a way compared to the other airlines locally. Like, I know, like, my parents like feel more comfortable flying Garuda Indonesia within Indonesia domestically because it has kind of the best safety records among other Indonesian companies. And it's generally run like the stewardesses are like great, and it's more on time than other airlines.
By Indonesian
and it's a premium airline.
Wow.
Like for Indonesian airline, if you're flying Garuda domestically, it's like the best option.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the most expensive option.
And even regionally, it's being
but-
taken more seriously,
yeah.
right? Like when you're competing with airlines like Singapore
Yeah.
Airlines, like it matters. I think
That's a difficult competition.
I mean, it is a difficult comparison, but I think it matters for national pride that, like, at least we have something that may still
Can fly in the Europe.
can at least fly in Europe. And I think to see that, you know, something that has a lot of goodwill in terms of people actually using the service
Yeah.
is being run by people like Ari Askhara and the people before him. It's kind of depressing and kind of sad. And, you know, after all, these are state-owned enterprises. Our taxes go in some way towards how they're being run. So we should be angry that this kind of conduct is being made on behalf of state-owned enterprises.
It's like, it just also, I think, means that once this company is run even more professionally, that it has so much potential.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, wow, given like all of their issues, they are still like a trusted, reputable airline.
Yeah.
Says something about the potential. And like, I think some of the actual people responsible for running it, you know, like I'm sure like given all of these issues, like there are really good people within Garuda who are doing their best professionally, and we hope those people will rise to the top and take control of this airline. Because you can't have like a good airline without good people, and I'm sure they're in there somewhere.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe it's the whistleblower.
It's just for sure not the people on top. And let's hope that the next president director of Garuda will do an actually good job instead of just profiting out of the enterprise.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find more information and resources of whatever we talked about on our website, dialogika.id.
Music credits to John Dealey, Lee Roosevelt, and of course, Broke for Free.
If you like what you hear and want to support us, please review our podcast on the Apple Podcast app or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. And please share our podcast with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about Dialogika.
If you want to get more involved, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is dialogikapodcast@gmail.com, or just shoot us a message on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and on Twitter. Please follow us on these various platforms. Our Twitter handle is @dialogikapod. Also, follow me on Twitter. It's StephTank. That's StePHTANGK.
Thank you again, and see you guys next time.
Bye!